it's Jess. Welcome back. Today's video is going to be my March wrap up. I cannot believe how many books I have to talk to you all about today. We just need to jump into this because I read so many books and it's going to take forever if I make this intro too long. So, as usual, up first is my book club's pick, which was Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. This is the third book in the Tawny Man trilogy, the ninth book in the realm of the Elderling. This is another 5-star read for me. I know that there were some people that didn't necessarily love the ending. For me, it was fine. It was not what I wanted, but thematically, it did make a lot of sense. So I can't really fault it because I feel like it's what would happen, even though it's not what I personally wanted to happen. I love Robin Hobb. I love her writing so very much. She is a comfort author for me. There's something about her writing that is just so warm and welcoming and cozy, despite the fact that she deals with some really heavy topics. I don't want anyone to go into any of her books thinking that they're going to be cozy fantasy, because they definitely aren't. It's just that is the feeling that her writing style evokes in me. Now, you will have noticed that I didn't actually tell you what this book is about. This is the third book in a trilogy and the ninth book in a series, and I really cannot tell you anything about it. I did, however, want to mention a couple things in this book series. Fitz has a couple of moments of homophobia. This series is single POV. You are in Fitz's head all the time. And I know from the way Robin Hobb writes about this situation, and also the way she has written other things into some of her other stories, that this is definitely a character flaw of Fitz's and a larger problem in the Six Duchies overall, and definitely not a point of view that Robin Hobb has herself. But I did want to mention it because it was jarring and very uncomfortable when this situation happened. It happened actually in book 2, and I forgot to mention it in last month's wrap up, so I'm really sorry about that. What makes it more uncomfortable than anything is that it isn't really challenged. I say not really because it is sort of challenged, but the viewpoint that Fitz has in his head is not challenged. It's very, very hard to talk about because I can't even reveal the circumstances under which it happens without giving massive spoilers away. And I will say also that we do kind of come back around to that topic in book 3. And in book 3, I think that there is a little bit of growth, and it is much less homophobia and much more characters talking about things. That's super vague. That is so vague. It is so difficult to talk about this book without spoiling things, but I did just want to mention that there is a moment of Fitz being very homophobic in the second book. I did also want to mention that there is a character that is mentally disabled in this series. I didn't necessarily see anything problematic in the way that Robin Hobb wrote this character, but I am not disabled, so I'm definitely not going to see this character with the level of nuance that someone who is disabled. I do think that you should seek out some reviews from mentally disabled readers and see how they feel about the way this character is written in the books. It's actually very interesting though, because there's quite a few examples of ableism in the series where Fitz actually does challenge what other people say about this mentally disabled character. And I did really like that Fitz is challenging. He's challenging people who are in power above him. He's challenging like random people who are just dickwads on the street. So I did think that that was really good. I also want to make it clear that I am not mentally disabled, and so I am not the review that you should be seeking to tell you whether this book handled a mentally disabled character well. That being said, I still ride or die for Robin Hobb, and this is a 5-star book, and it's a 5-star series, and I love her writing style, and I cannot wait to get to the Rainwild Chronicles. So the next 3 books up, I actually didn't read in the month of March, but I didn't put up the vlog for this until March. They are the books from my Lolita vlog. The first one being Lolita itself by Vladimir Nabokov. I hated it. I hated it. This was such a bad reading experience for me. It made me so angry. It made me feel terrible. I hated it. It was 1 star. Lolita is a classic, and it is about a pedophile abusing a 12-year-old girl for years. It's written with amazing creative prose, but I hate it. Next up in that vlog was The Real Lolita by Sarah Wyman. This is a non-fiction investigatory story. Basically, Sarah Wyman did research on the case of Sally Horner, which was a very, very famous kidnapping case in 1948, and showed all the evidence that Nabokov was inspired by this real life story when he was writing Lolita. I ended up giving this book 2 stars, mainly because there's just not enough content in this book to make an entire book about it. The book was extremely redundant. It was very repetitive, which I know seems like a redundant sentence to say, but when I mean that, I mean that she literally repeats herself in the same paragraph and then brings up the same point again like 4 chapters later and doesn't add anything to it. There's honestly just not enough meat in this to make it into an entire book. Probably 60% of this book is filler and could have been cut. I don't want to discourage anybody from reading this and buying it if they want to, because I could tell that Sarah Wyman did a lot of research and spent a lot of man hours on this, and it's not her fault that there's just not enough meat to this story. And honestly, I feel like she was kind of like, listen, I put in too much work, I'm just gonna publish the book. And you know what? Good for her. Like, I'm glad that she did this. I'm glad that she got paid for the amount of work that I know she must have done to publish this book. I just don't think it's worth your time. And then the third book of that vlog, which was the star of the vlog, is Becoming Lolita by Allison Wood. This is a memoir about a woman, Allison Wood, who was groomed and abused by her high school English teacher, and now she is a professor in college and she teaches Lolita in her college class. I loved this. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was so well written. I highly recommend this if you can handle the content matter. It was so emotional and moving for me. Obviously, for all 3 of the books that were in this vlog, there are heavy content warnings about sexual assault and grooming and all sorts of different forms of abuse, including sexual abuse. So I do want to say, like, this book is very dark, it's very heavy, and it is very difficult to read at times. But if you can handle it, I do highly recommend it, because I think it is Excellent. Next up, I have more books to talk about from a second vlog that I posted this month, and that was me reading for 24 hours and reading books to try to catch up to all of the series that I'm in the middle of. The first book that I read for that was Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson. This is a novella that takes place between books 3 and 4 in the Stormlight Archive series. I had such a good time in this book. It's so fun. It is just like this cute little adventure story that has massive, potentially world-breaking ramifications for the Stormlight Archives. Overall, I rated this little novella 4 stars. It follows a tradeswoman named Ryson, and she has a sick pet. And she basically uses a commission from the queen in order to fund an expedition so that she can take her sick pet back home, because the queen, well, multiple queens actually want somebody to investigate an area near where her pet originates from. It's got like some time on a boat traveling. It has an animal companion. It's got some really, really cool big things happening within the world of Stormlight, and it's also a chance for you to get to spend some time with characters that are very minor side characters in other novels, and they get their time to shine, and I just really, really loved seeing them. I thought it was so much fun. I had a blast the entire time. I did also want to mention that Ryson is a disabled main character. She uses a wheelchair and she is actually unable to walk. There are a lot of conversations in this book about her disability and about how she feels interacting with certain people, and about creating mobility aids that could help her and other people. I thought that it was great, but again, I am not disabled, so definitely look up a disabled reviewer's point of view for this book. Next up in that vlog, I read Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones, and I loved it. This is one of my most anticipated books of the year. I'm so happy. It 100% delivered. This is another 5-star read for the month. This is the sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw. Due to what went down at the end of that book, Jade was arrested, and then she spent 4 years in prison while her case was like investigated and tried and all of that. Screw the American penal system, but that's a whole different topic. Anyways, at the start of this novel, Jade is released and she makes it back to town, and coincidentally, as she makes it back to town, there is a prison convoy transporting a serial killer, and oh no, there happens to be a really, really bad snowstorm, and he escapes. Things get real murdery really fast. I love Jade. Jennifer, she is such a precious character to me. I don't mean like she's precious, I just mean I love her so much. She has definitely carved out a very special place in my heart. If you loved the writing style of My Heart is a Chainsaw but thought that there wasn't enough blood, this is what you've been looking for. This definitely has the same writing style as My Heart is a Chainsaw, but like the murders start happening immediately, and like the body count keeps ramping up. Things get more and more bloody and gross the further you get in here. Per usual, Stephen Graham Jones gaslights the reader several times, so you never really know what's going on. The whole thing basically takes place in a giant blizzard, and the way he uses the snow as almost its own character to hide things, reveal things, cover things up, it's just so good. It like made me so nervous the entire time. This one actually has a lot of points of view, and they're all set up to give the reader minor clues that add up to a bigger whole, or to gaslight the shit out of you so that you don't know what's going on. And it's all very intentional. It's beautifully crafted. It is expertly well done, but I did miss just hanging out and spending time in Jade's head. So I think both are excellent books, and I do think that, like, honestly, both are perfect books. Like, the choices that Stephen Graham Jones made in this book that made me like My Heart is a Chainsaw better were necessary choices to make this book what it is, and they worked so well. I just happen to prefer the first book in the series. Both are 5 stars. Both are perfect. No notes. They're so excellent. It's very graphic, though. It's very, very bloody and very graphic and extremely, extremely violent. But I just love it. I cannot wait for the 3rd book in this trilogy to come out. I just saw Stephen Graham Jones tweeting about, like, researching for the 3rd book, and I was like, oh my God, it's happening! I cannot wait. And then the 3rd book that I finished in that 24-hour reading vlog is actually another novella by Brandon Sanderson. I read Redon, which is the 2nd novella in the Cytonic series. It takes place between books 2 and 3 in that series and after the first novella. Overall, I really, really liked it. I ended up rating it 3 stars. Obviously, I can't tell you anything about the plot. It would be massive, massive spoilers, but I will say that in this novella, you follow a character who is an alien that you meet in book 2, and it's just really funny to see this alien character interacting with the humans and trying to, like, learn and figure out them and, like, their reaction to seeing humans do, like, very typical social human things, and them just, like, not understanding anything about, like, why that would even matter. I think that this novella has a massive impact on the overall world of the Cytonic series. And I mean, first of all, you need to read the novellas. Like, you have to. You will be so lost in Cytonic if you don't read the 2 novellas before it. Oh my God, I've been calling this the Cytonic series because that's the next book in the series I have to read. It's the Skyward series. Whatever, you know what I'm saying. What happened in this, like, little novella has some massive, massive impacts on the series overall, but we didn't really get to see how exactly it played out. I still had, like, a blast reading it, and even though the stakes were real, and even though there definitely were some dark moments and dark conversations in the novella, overall it was really, really fun. If you know me, you know that I don't really read books where the primary genre is romance. I'm a fantasy girly through and through, and that's nothing against the romance genre. I love, one of my favorite things is when my fantasy books have a romantic subplot. I love it so much, but I just don't tend to gravitate towards romance books. But something in me has changed. The cover for the 2nd book in the Reaper series, and the title was announced by Wrench Pecco. The first book was Silver Under Nightfall, which was one of my favorite books of the entire year last year. And it is a polyamorous vampire couple adopting vampire hunter, where there is probably 50% plot, 50% romance, and that book changed me at the core level. So I was at Barnes & Noble. If you saw my book haul, you already know that a certain book was on the buy one 50% off table, and I went on to Goodreads and I read reviews, and people said, like, the plot is good. That's what I was looking for. I'm looking for very good romance, very good plot, 50-50, smush them together, give me a book. You know, I did my due diligence. And I thought I was getting a book where it was going to be 50% romance, 50% plot. And I thought it was going to be polyamorous vampires. And so I bought Court of the Vampire Queen by Katie Robert. And oh boy, this was not what I thought it was at all. It is about polyamorous vampires. That is true. It's also erotica. Did I read it? Yes. Did I DNF it? No. But unfortunately, I did end up rating this book 2 stars. I want to make it very transparent that I don't read erotica. This is my very first erotica novel ever. So honestly, take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm not really sure how to rate this book. And I definitely want to meet this book at this level. So it's not the book's fault that I bought an erotica novel not knowing it was erotica. And so I want to make it clear, like, that's not why I'm rating it 2 stars. The reason that I ended up rating it 2 stars is because I think the book got really repetitive. There were actually like entire paragraphs that were just like world building that were repeated. I'm like, I get it. Like, I already know that. Like, you don't need to repeat this information. You don't need to like refresh it in my mind. Like, I got it. I'm there with you. I'm reading the book. And overall, the book did feel info dumpy. Anytime there was like a world building moment, it felt really, really info dumpy. There was also just like a lot of repetition of like the exact same word. It's like one of those things where if you don't notice it, it's fine. But as soon as you notice that the author keeps using the same word, you just cannot unsee it. It drove me crazy when I was reading this book. Not enough to DNF though. The other reason that I rated it 2 stars, and this is the part where I'm like, I don't know if I should consider this a reason to lower the rating or not, because I just don't know if this is what you expect from a plot in a book like this, where it's literally smut from page 1. The plot of this entire book is very, very flimsy at best, and I have accepted that. Even taking into account that the plot is intentionally very flimsy, there were several times where I could not suspend my belief, and I was just like, absolutely not. So that is why overall I am giving this book 2 stars. Now, I will say it was very spicy, like very spicy, very, very, very spicy. I don't have hardly anything to compare it to, but it was very spicy. It was also extremely entertaining and extremely readable. I read this in less than 24 hours. Sorry if there is a camera angle change. My phone died, but we're back at it. And I did just want to say one last thing that I really, really loved and appreciated about this book is that Katie Robert took the time to put a content warning list in the beginning of this book. And I think that that is such a sensitive and thoughtful thing to do as an author. I think it is so important, and I honestly think that more authors should do that. I just think that content warnings are very, very important, especially if you plan on reading this book. Definitely look up the content warnings because there are some that I would consider pretty significant in this book. If you want pure smut that involves a harem of vampires and one queen, like, honestly, go for it, because it was really, 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 really spicy. It was. So, like, if that's what you want, this book will deliver. But if you're looking for something that's a little more plot heavy, this is not going to give it to you, unfortunately. After I read Court of the Vampire Queen, I was still looking to get that fix for a book to hold me over before the second book in the Reaper series comes out. And so I did quite a bit more research this time, and thanks to Aaron from Booked and Busy, I found the Blood Grace series. I read books 1 and 2 in this series. They're quite long, and I am just having the time of my life in this series. I don't know how many romance books you need to read to be a romance girly, but I might be a romance girly now because I just I love these books so much. I couldn't put either of these books down once I started reading them. They are the reason that I did not finish City of Heavenly Fire, and I already ordered book 3 and 4 in the series. This starts off following Leo and Cassia. Cassia is a human and Leo is a Hesperine, which is this world's version of vampires. Cassia is the king's daughter, and the king has called a summit to speak with the leaders of the Hesperines to make an alliance with them. Leo is part of the diplomatic envoy. He is an ambassador, and he is sent there to help negotiations for their alliance. The human nation is very, very afraid of the Hesperines. There are a lot of things that they think about the Hesperines that are just like factually not true. They have a lot of prejudices against them because they do drink blood. They think that, you know, they're just like bloodthirsty, murderous monsters. Cassia does not think this, and she does end up arranging for herself to meet Leo because she has a specific question for them. And then the two of them realize that they actually do enjoy talking together, and things progress from there. Honestly, I think that there's just so much to love about this series. I really, really love both Leo and Cassia. Leo is definitely like the naive, overly optimistic one, and Cassia is much more pragmatic and much more focused on the goals that she wants to accomplish. This also has the forbidden love trope. Leo is there as an ambassador. If his bosses found out that he was messing around with the king's daughter, that could have just terrible political ramifications, especially because the human king really does not like the Hesperines. He's also really not a good dude. The king is like a very stereotypical evil king. So if the two of them are found out, it would be disastrous for either of them. I loved watching them learn to trust each other and just to like learn more about each other. I love watching them just spend time and talk together. This book is pitched as slow burn, and I'm not entirely sure if it is or not. So it is true that in terms of like page count, it's slow burn, because honestly, nothing, zero happens between them for like half the book. But the thing is, the entire book is only, I think, like 3 or 4 weeks long. So the amount of time that they've known each other isn't long, but it can feel slow within the book. And it feels like a slow burn romance because of how much time Bella Roth spends building their relationship and letting you be with these characters. In my opinion, the book is paced perfectly. There was so much tension on so many levels too, because like there's tension of like, are they gonna get caught when they do something risky? And then there's also tension of like, are they gonna kiss yet? I also really love the care that Bella Roth put in like developing this world. There's so much world building that went on in here, and that is continued in book 2, and I loved it. World building is something that is very important to me. You could tell that like she really cares. It felt like a real world. And then on top of all of that, there's a really great plot line too. I love the political plot line of this book. I think it is excellent. So I will say that I think the romance plotline and the characters, Cassia and Leo, are definitely the most developed. They're definitely at the top. Now, underneath that is the secondary political plot line. It is very, very strong. It is great, but it is not as well developed, I think, as maybe some other epic high fantasy plot lines are. And I think that that's okay. Like, I think that for what this book is trying to do and the amount of pages that it has, I think the plotline is excellent. I just think that overall it does take a little bit of a backseat to the romance. The political plotline also provides a lot of tension throughout the story, and I think it's really, really great. I will say though that other than Cassia and Leo, I don't necessarily think some of the other characters are as well developed. I mean, there's a whole like list of side characters, and some are more important than other side characters. So obviously the characters are more developed in terms of like how relevant they are to the story. But I definitely think that Cassia and Leo are the best developed characters in the story. Cassia and Leo feel super real. I absolutely believe that both of them are real people, but there are definitely some characters that feel a little one-dimensional. And this is also a book that is like pure escapism, in the sense that like the bad guys are the bad guys and the good guys are the good guys. Now, I want to make it clear, Cassie and Leo are not perfect people. They both have their flaws. They are nuanced individuals. However, the good guys are very good and the bad guys are very bad. And I think that in this book, it worked perfectly, because honestly, this book is like pure escapism. I felt so warm and fuzzy. I felt butterflies in this. It had me smiling so much, and I really loved it. And I think the fact that there aren't necessarily morally gray characters in here lent this book to be so heartwarming and so warm and so beautiful to read. I understand that like in the real world, we're all different shades of gray, and I do appreciate characters that aren't necessarily only good or only bad. I like more nuance in that. I think in this book, it worked out perfectly. But if you don't necessarily like the bad guy being the bad guy and the good guys being the good guys, then like this might not be the book series for you. But I loved it. I love this. I highly recommend this. Bella Roth also put a content warning in this book too at the beginning of it, and I'm wondering like, is that common in romance? Because I've seen it in other books, but it's by no means the standard in fantasy or horror or thriller. So I'd be curious, if you're a romance girly, let me know, because I just think it's such a good idea. I'm very for authors putting a content warning in the beginning of their books. This is a 5-star read for me. I really love it. I did also read book 2 in this series. I ended up rating book 2 4 stars, but I still think that it's very excellent. Book 2 is kind of weird because it sets up the continuation of the political plot line, but book 2 is really about the relationship. And it's not necessarily like a happily ever after or anything like that, because there are 6 books out in this series, and I think a 7th one coming out this year. So like obviously this isn't the end of the story, but rather than this book ending with a conclusion to the political plot line the way that book 1 did, I mean, it's not a conclusion, but book 1 ended at like a really good stopping point in the political plot line, but book 2 ends at a really good stopping point in the romantic plot line. I don't have really any complaints about that, but I did see that some of the reviews on Goodreads are like, this book is a whole lot of nothing happens with the plot line. And I did want to mention that like, if you're talking about the politics in this book, it is true. Not very much happens within the politics of this book, but this book is very much about like the couple and their relationship and them developing. Because this is dual POV, there are things that happen to Leo and things that happen to Cassia that they then have to like tell each other, because like they have to tell each other. I don't know how you could get around it. There were a couple moments where it did feel a little bit repetitive, just because I'm like, we already saw this happen, but now like Cassia then needs to tell it to Leo and vice versa. And I do think that at times the world building in this book got a little bit info dumpy. It got kind of show not tell, which in the first book I did not have any complaints. In the first book, the world building I think was done expertly. It was just woven into the story. In this book, it definitely is like the characters just like telling you things, which logically within the scope of this book makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily feel good when you're reading it. There you go. Those are all 7 books that I read this month, plus the 3 from the Lolita vlog, which I read earlier in the year. Thank you so very much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate you spending time. If you enjoyed this, I hope that you will subscribe. I hope that you stay safe and hydrated this week, and I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye!